All right, welcome to this belated edition of Live Coding Happy Hour. I am Dave Slusher. Thanks everybody for joining, and let's go around the horn and introduce ourselves.
Dave, you might want to move your camera up just a little bit or your head down. We're getting there. You're sort of anonymized by
right.
your eyes being cut off. I'm Chuck
These are
Tomasi,
least of my problems right now. So.
Yeah, we had quite the challenge and a noble effort to try and get this the other way. But I'm Chuck Tomasi, platform architect with the platform practices team, working with solution consultants and wonderful people like Dave and Josh.
And I'm Josh Nearius. I'm a developer evangelist in the platform business unit here at ServiceNow. I work on the same team as Dave, and I also get to work with Chuck from time to time.
And I'm Dave Slusher. I developer evangelist on the platform team, developer.servicenow.com. If you want to get yourself a free developer instance and do all of that fun stuff. All right. So we're about 15 minutes late here. We had technical problems in the audio, and in fact, I'm have more or less isolated it to my computer because I have figured out that I have actually had corruption on my disk, and I went and repaired disk earlier, and so I'm going to take the whole blame on this. Is that it's almost certainly my system for this? Is that when we go to do the audio, I'm not routing it correctly, and so our grand vision was that we were going to do this both live to live coding. We're going to use OBS and stream it and go to live coding.tv as well as YouTube, and it just took a dump. So what we're going to do is go back the old school way. You guys cover me for a second while I get set up because I had to reboot and
yeah, you bet. This is a continuation of the automated test framework. Am I correct, Josh?
Yep, that is where we're going to be picking up. So we spent a bunch of time doing various things with ATF. We played with some forms and did some lookups of data and learned fun things like you have to make sure your workflow is actually checked out. I'm sorry, not checked out. It's got to be checked in before you do
have been published.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That was the problem. I was trying to test a non-published workflow, which for some crazy reason does not work very well when you go to be the different user. It works great for the admin user.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's the way workflows work. You can test them when they're checked out, but nobody else is using them until you check them in. So if your test was impersonating a user, that's effectively like logging in as another user, and they can't use the unpublished version.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now we're looking more into the scripting activities.
Yes, so we'll talk about this, and let me go ahead and lock the screen to myself.
Yeah, because I was doing a demo last week, and somebody said, well, show me how you can script something. And I said, well, there's about 45 lines of comments in here that tell you all the APIs, and I was struggling to throw something together on the fly. So I'm hoping to learn as much as contribute as much today.
So I played with this some last night. So that our initial test, anti-test, that worked fine last night was I spent about an hour last evening working on this, and I found a couple issues that I gutted through, and I'll give you the fast forward version. Actually, before we do that, since we're in the old school thing, Josh, do you want to do the API thing of the week, or you want to just bag it because we're having so many problems?
Let's save that for next week just because we lost some time, and that way you can get through this.
Okay. So step number one, as I kind of fast forward through my lessons learned, is everything that I was doing up to this point, we were doing in the same scope as the application that I was creating. So the test tracker is what I was writing, or a travel tracker. That was what I was writing the tests against. And in that scope, all the tests existed. And all was well and good up until I got to where I was trying to do some Jasmine testing. And lo and behold, I was not able to get the Jasmine tests to run when they were running from inside the scope. Because I would get aspects of the Jasmine test were saying, that they were just undefined. So I said, let's take this off the table. And I took the whole test and I cloned it into global. And as soon as I did that, those parts of that began working.
Interesting.
So step number one, so everything up to this point I did in the same scope, and it all worked. So I was creating the tests in the scope. When I got to the server-side scripting, that did not work from my scope. So I had to switch to global for that. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two was that I didn't quite understand the syntax of how to get to this. So we'll kind of go bake off, and I'll just show you what I did last night that actually does run. So the context, Chuck, that you brought up was to do So the first use case you brought to the table was when you've got your test is running some code, and as a side effect creates another record, and you want to assert that the record's there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have there's other ways to do it, but absolutely the Jasmine, Jasmine is capable of doing that. So this is what this is what you're talking about before. There's all this boilerplate that comes when you create that with example code of how you use this. And so I created this test last night, and it took me a while to figure this out. For a little while there, this is by the way, again, with all this ATF stuff, I've more or less come to it with complete naivete, right? I knew nothing about it. And so I came down and I saw in this boilerplate, example code up here that you can do this, right? That you can use this to get the output of previous steps, right? So this is the equivalent of, this is the programmatic equivalent of that little cannonball icon that you have when you're doing the, when you're using the UI to create the tests. So everything that had an output from the previous test, which in our test here was steps 1 and 4, creates that. Now I was reading this, and I'll be honest, I thought that this right here was some sort of magic syntax. And I did not realize, I worked with this for about 30 minutes before I realized that this is not only magic syntax, this is literal just description. This is pseudocode. This is saying, put the sysid of step 1 in here.
Oh, that makes me sad that you have to hard code sysids.
It absolutely does make me sad too. So, and the other thing is, again, what I'm saying is, it's the sysid of the test step. So that's, so you have to think about it for a little bit. And so to do this, I had to go back to here,
right,
and get, step 4. I had to get the sysid of this guy.
Yep.
So, do it the other way so that
once you have that reference to that record, then can you reference, like the cannonball thing does, the user that was referenced from that step?
What this does, yeah. So given that sysid,
yep.
And how do I? Okay. So given that sysid, I can come back here, and in my server-side script, and I'm going to apologize to everybody, there's going to be more navigation in this one than there typically is. Partly, this is a validation of like how nice it is to when you could do stuff in Studio, because this is a throwback to the old days when you had to navigate for every time you did anything, you had to navigate something. So that's the sysid. So the object that it creates for you out of here is more or less like a lookup into a hash table of outputs of previous steps. Given this, you can get anything that's defined on that.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is, and this took, I'm not sure if this is documented. I haven't found the documentation. In some ways, we're kind of creating the documentation here. Is that I tried multiple bits of syntax to actually get this out. And you'll notice that it took me a few tries. If you watched the video last night, what's the first thing? So you've got this object. So don't look at the thing. Just look at this. You've done this, and now you've got an object that represents the output. What's the first thing? And you know that you can dot walk to values of that. What's the first thing that you would like naively try? The principle of least surprise. There's a dot property to get the sysid. What's the first one you would try?
Dot sysid.
Exactly. That does not work. That's not it. So I think that's a little bit of a violation of principle of least surprise.
Yeah. If surprised by that, then I'd probably do a JSON.stringify on the object that I got back.
Let's do that. We did not do that yet. And let us see. Let's go ahead and we can do that. So
that's sort of my look under the hood and find out what properties do I have.
Let us see if that works, because
if it's a glide record, I'm curious to see if that's going to do it.
It may or may not.
I don't think it is a glide record.
Well, let's see what this tells us.
None of it doesn't have a sysid.
I'm going to go ahead and run this. So you'll fast forward for that thing. Record ID is the value that contains the sysid of what was created.
Did one of our developers miss boot camp?
I don't know. All right. So I'm going to update this, and I'm going to rerun this, and we can just talk about this while we, because it's going to, the other thing is it's going to take a little bit. You'll notice too that it did all the server side steps. It's now waiting for a client test runner. I'm going to click here. This will open a test runner, which did it do it? I'm in full screen mode, so I don't see.
You know, and one of the interesting things about this, if that is a record and not an object, that would probably explain why it's record ID, because the record itself will have a sys ID because everything has a sys ID. But that's what.
Yeah, I'm sure it represents something other than your typical glide record.
And what I might do in a second, so you see over here in the script owner, I just switched the script owner for a minute while we're running. Yeah, I was talking last night about the length of time it takes to run these, and so I may actually we may take 3 minutes and see if we can cut that down, because I think there may be some. If you remember from previous weeks, we had that parameter that we would pass in, basically like the amount of time to wait for a thing to happen, and we might try shaving that down, because I think actually it's settled on the high side. Okay, so. We got it. We got the test succeeded. But in fact, in this case, we're not, that's not our primary thing we're looking for. What we want to do is now look at the log. Of what this thing logged as it was running. Interesting. So there's a bunch of this stuff.
But back to what we talked about in previous ones, will we see anything in the system log because of rollbacks? Or is that going to only show up in the test log?
Oh, that's right.
That's right. Okay, so that's not. This is actually not the log we want to look at. We want to look at the. No, actually,
at 13.
No, it did in fact roll it back. So what we want to do is actually look at the test result, because it's logging that to the test result as well.
This is not the log you're looking for.
Aha.
Aha. Much better.
So this is, in fact. What can we do to? Let me get rid of this.
Record watcher blacklist equals true serializer.
So, okay, we're gonna have to hold on a second. We're gonna need to
copy paste.
Copy this guy because it's too much to see.
Yep.
What's that? What's the one that you guys like? Jason Beautifier.
Jason Beautifier is a good one. Yeah. Jason is a person.
I think Jason McKee needs to go to CreatorCon and forget the A on his name tag.
All right, so this is
Jason McKee.
All right, so here you go. This is what was returned. This is step 4, basically. And so we got. Let's see what we got. Oh, let's explore this. I'm gonna start from the bottom and go up. Record ID. Wait a second. Record ID. Why is record ID false? Table sys ID
is empty. Table is empty. What did it give us? What's that other?
That makes me wonder if those are.
Oh, sys meta stuff.
Are those things that we can't see if they're objects that JSON.stringify can't serialize?
Maybe like trying to do a stringify on a glide record.
Yeah, something like that.
Because so that didn't. No, here's what. So we don't care about the value. We really only care about the keys. Okay. So this tells us that table, record ID, sys ID are all they're all defined.
Okay.
And those are the only 3 things defined on there, other than sysmeta. All right. So that's
what we learned from this.
So what we've learned is that we only have sys ID theoretically should actually be working. So let us go back and see why this wasn't.
Which can search and replace with not really.
All right, so let's go back down here. So step 4 output. So we're looking it up via the sys-ID. This is the sys-ID.
Yeah.
So we stringified that object. That doesn't actually show anything. And so table name, which should be table.
Okay.
Go ahead and let's do sys-ID because we want to see, was it just a bogosity of like my test that we weren't actually seeing it? Because according to this ought to be populated. So we want to see. So I'm going to get rid of this. I don't think we need that again. So this, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because we know actually that in the log this shows up empty, probably for exactly the same reason as the other thing, which is that our stringify is not descending. It's not recursively descending into the objects.
Okay.
Which frankly it ought to be. Stringify worth its salt, you think would.
You'd think it would.
All right, so we'll go ahead and go back to this. I'm going to update this and run it one more time. Actually, before I do that,
want to deactivate some of those other steps.
Off the top of my head, we're going to need some of these guys in there.
You're going to need number 4.
Yeah, we're going to need number 4 for sure. Let me see. Timeout. There's only 1 second on that one. Let me see if any of these others have timeouts that I can shorten. That does not. Does open a new form have a timeout? Does not. Submit does it have a timeout? No. So really, that's just yeah. We'll just have to kind of suffer with this the way it is because I thought maybe we could shave some stuff out and make that run faster, but I don't see that happening.
Testing your test.
All right, and so our thing is still running, happening, etc., etc.
I need to go back and watch the other ones, but did you describe what the whole describe and it function and whatnot were?
No, so we'll get to that in 1 second. So we really kind of jumped to the middle of this. So I'll let me back up.
Thought I missed episodes 1, 2, and 3 when I walked into A New Hope.
Yeah, bro. This is in literary terms, we're doing this in media res, and then we'll flash back to the serious stuff. So let's look and see. So now our table is populated. Our document ID is populated, and our sys ID is populated. And again,
but they're different.
They are different. So
they are different. So does record represent step 4's sys ID? No, because that was 0EE0.
I think the document ID is at the related one, and this is the actual record itself.
Or is that the test? I don't know. Is that the step?
No,
the step 4 ended with 0EE0.
Yeah, not the definition of the test step, but maybe I don't know. So here's what we know. We know that these things, document ID and sys ID, are not interchangeable. Which off the top of your head looks like it might be.
I thought it was record ID.
Oh, this is my, record ID, but this is my
your label string.
My label and my log. And also it's not table name. So this is all these are all wrong because I didn't change these to match. But if we use dot table, we do actually get the right so I think what this is this is the sys ID of the flight I created. This is the table of the flight, and then this is the record ID of the related record that we created.
That would make sense.
Okay, I think that's how that goes. I could be wrong on that because now that I think about it, this has got to be the sys ID of the, because we're looking up the incident by it. But again, let's go back and talk about what we're doing here. So,
look at step 4.
Now let's actually just talk about this. Okay. So when you you go in here and you create one of these server-side validation scripts, first thing you'll see is this: every time you create one, you get a giant splat, as Chuck referred to, of this boilerplate. That this is a lot of the documentation that you have. This is at this point 100% of the documentation I have, because I haven't gone out and sought anything else. Because part of the experience is of us seeing what you can do without having to look at it. And now I think we figured out that this is one of those things that may reward a little run through the whatever's published. So this is kind of how you, from the outermost level, this is how you do the Jasmine tests. So you do a describe. Mm-hmm. You're passing it 2 parameters, which is the name of the test, the description of the test, and then you're passing it a function to be executed. Mm-hmm. Then you have the it, and to be honest, I don't love this, because I wish this was something more descriptive, because what exactly, I think it should be something like spec, or I don't know what, to me, this is not a great name for the thing. But then you're kind of describing the unit of work in here. Mm-hmm. And then in that, you're also giving it another description. I don't, off the top of my, at this point, I don't really deeply grok the difference between the describe and the it. It seems like a second level of doing exactly the same thing, right?
And I think it's really organization. It's really saying describe is a group.
Describe is like a suite, and this is like a test.
That's and this is like all Jasmine specific stuff. This isn't ServiceNow's decision. This is right. Just the Jasmine framework.
Like this is like ever since we started doing this, you notice if I have a drum to beat, it is clarity over everything, right? So for me, if it's longer or even a little more cumbersome, I want this to be as clear as possible, and that to me is kind of a little problem with the Jasmine syntax. This is not clear. But same kind of thing is you're describing the test, and you're also giving it a function, and that function is arbitrary code. Inside that arbitrary code, you can have a work, as we saw before. You can have, essentially, you can do any kind of anything that your environment can do, which means you have glide system, you have glide record, etc. So at this point in this block, you're doing ServiceNow work exactly as you're used to doing it. In addition, you have a few more. You have some Jasmine functionality that has been injected into the scope, and this is the main one that we're talking about. This is the meat and potatoes of this thing, which is expect. And expect is, this is using standard expect syntax. You expect a condition, and this is like all this stuff. You can use this. Like, honestly, if you got rid of the not to be false, it would be the exact same thing. I believe in expect, and Josh, you may know a little bit more about expect than I do. I believe that these are like mapped to no ops. Basically, the not is mapped to a no op.
Yeah, I believe you are correct with that.
Yeah. So I said basically in expect, you're chaining things together. It's kind of it's sort of that style where this returns an object. And then when you do the dot, it's essentially not much different from the dot walking, right? Expect is basically dot walking this thing, and calling each thing to the right is calling the thing left of that. And so in this case, just expect true is equivalent to that. But you can, again, I'm not one to poo-poo this because this increases the clarity. So.
Yeah.
So and you could also do that. So this is actually not. This is the 2B. I think is not a no op because there's not a 2B. There are other things in here that are no op. So this is probably actually a negation operator, and this is like a comparator probably. But there are things in this expect syntax that if you actually go down and look at it, you see that they're just mapped. They're just there to make it kind of natural languagey, but they don't actually do anything. So like expect not to be false. It's implicit that you're expecting to true. But you see, then if you look in the boilerplate, so this is what we were playing with. The first thing is retrieving the object that is the outputs of previous steps. And as we said, none of us here, I think everyone probably everywhere agrees, we don't love this. It's probably a thing that just had to be done to make it work on this time scale of the original release. But I can't speak to. I have no insight into anything that's happening on that before or since, but that kind of has that feel like this is the only way we can make this work. So let's do it this way. And so then now you see in the boilerplate this is the kind of things that you create a glide record. You can query on the glide record. Set value. Create it in this one. Let's show this little bit of boilerplate code. This is actually creating a record. So you certainly have that available to you if you wanted to do that in there. So this is, this bit of example code is actually doing an end run around all the stuff we're doing. It's actually directly creating a task, inserting it, and then looking to see.
Can you read it back?
It's actually not even doing that. It's just setting an output. So it's setting a message saying that it successfully does that. It's actually not even asserting on that. It's just creating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because it's doing a get.
Yeah, you're right. It is doing a
new glide record on the same table and saying, now go try and get that sys ID that you just got.
Right. And so this return true. Yeah, this return true is kind of I think probably the
success fail.
Success fail. Although I think probably the nature of these expects
similar
is that, I think if you do an expect, it probably changes the return value to false. I'm guessing that. I don't know that for a fact, but it seems the same. Out of curiosity, here, let's go ahead and let's experiment with that.
What I get out of the return true and return false is that they also had some output messages.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and
I don't know how you would do that with the expect. That's interesting.
So let's go ahead and do this. So we know that we ran this test earlier. It passed, right? So I'm going to go ahead and let's do this. And this is just another. So you get the steps, you get the outputs, and step result. And these are kind of magic things that are in scope that are just being passed to it. So I'm going to set the output message here didn't really.
No, notice you have another expect.
Fail. Yeah, so I got two expects in here.
Two equal.
You'll notice. So I did this. I did this last night when I was playing with this. So my naive. So this is actually how I figured out all this stuff about this. Is my naive first step at this? We'll kind of talk about that. Is I created this query. So we wanted to verify that the output, which is the output of step 4, we're going to verify we had an incident with a correlation ID that was the output from step 4. Okay. So we did the query, passed this in here. And then I did this right here, expect GR next. Okay. So that asserts that this query, in fact, returned a record. And then I did this just to goof around. I actually originally put this 10 because I expected the 10 would fail. The log message that I saw was that 71 is not equal to 10. And what I expected was something like 1 is not equal to 10. And then I said 71, how am I getting 71? And then I realized that this was empty. And in fact, what I was querying on is every incident in this, out of the box that has no correlation ID. So I was doing the opposite query that I thought I was doing almost. So then that's when I put the second one in. So in fact, in this test, this is basically superfluous, right? That's still in there as an example, but that's actually not doing anything realistic. Because then what I wanted to do is what I really realized is that this is kind of a bad assertion because it doesn't go towards the badness of my query, because I'm expecting 1 and only 1, and that returns anything greater than 0. And so it's possible for a lot of this to be wrong. And then, so at that point, that expect that there was anything returned by this query did not tell me anything that I expected, or it did not tell me if this test passed, because this test is verifying, did I create one incident with this correlation ID? Because my step 4 output was broken, I in fact returned the opposite of what I wanted. And because of the way I was asserting on that, I wasn't telling myself anything. What I want to know is, do I have 1 and only 1? So this is really the expect that I want for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of taught me an object lesson in construction of these assertions, which is that asserting that anything is there is probably a bad way to do it, because it's not going to catch a bad query that is too broad or wrong. So that was kind of a lesson learned. So I'm going to change this to didn't really fail testing. So now our expect is going to pass. We're going to set an output message to the step result, and we're just going to return false at the top level. So I expect that this would, I'm going to stop. I'm trying to not use the word expect because it's overloaded in this context. I would anticipate that this will now give us a failed result, and it will give us this message at the top. We're just kind of, again, we're going for principle of least surprise. What exactly is going to happen when we do that? So we know that the expect call, when the expect call fails, I actually kind of know what that looks like. And if I go back into the test results, I can show you some failed ones from previously. I feel like I'm talking a mile a minute. So I'm
curious to know how many of these expect arguments that are methods are available on the server side code.
Well, let's go ahead and
I just did a quick search for Jasmine expect, and I see things like dates. Expect date to be after other date. Are those applicable to glide date time dates, or are they expect client side dates?
I just threw a thing in the chat for you, Dave. There's a Jasmine intro.
Okay.
If you look for Jasmine's, I think if you Google for Jasmine syntax, it'll get you there as well. But they actually have a nice breakdown of a lot of the things you can do, because it's one of those things where there's so many different ways you can chain these things together. You kind of have to see the examples.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. So I returned false. That didn't. We logged that. It did not fail.
And I kind of think that makes sense. I almost said expect, because I think that makes sense because, in essence, the assertion, the expect is your assertion, and what you return, I don't believe has any bearing.
Okay. So then the question becomes, and this is what Josh is talking about. So this looks like, this is the boilerplate that we're talking about.
And then as you scroll down, you start to get into all sorts of different situations where you can
expect to be, expect not to be,
to equal, to be defined. You can actually do things like expect something to have been called. It's pretty crazy.
Expect to match regex, expect to be defined. So we're just looking at null, not null, or
to be
undefined.
Truthy, to be falsy. I like those.
Truthy. So truthy, we're talking about things that coerce to truth. One, any character value, the word true, and falsy would be like 0, the word false. What else? I can't remember what else coerces to false. Null.
Null, undefined.
0.
Yeah. 0, false.
To contain. So that's in an array. Saying, does some member of an array contain that?
Nice.
Oh, or a substring. Kind of in JavaScript, strings and arrays have this kind of fuzzy Venn diagram where they overlap.
I like that. To be close. To be close to.
To be close to.
Interesting. So you can define how close. That's pretty cool. To throw,
What's
not to throw.
What's that? So that second, is that within 2 significant figures? Is that what that is saying?
That's what it looks like.
Or
expect
2 digits? I don't know.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm sure there are individual definitions.
I have to look at the to throw, to not throw.
I feel like I'm learning a foreign language.
To throw error.
To be, to see, to play, to hear.
To be or not to be.
Contain any kind of to equal. All right. So you have this, and this is, in other words, so this is basically, I'm going to assume that is this here is the test.
John Caruso's also put some good stuff into the
YouTube
chat.
Okay. Cool. And I think that's what isn't that the same thing we're looking at right here? I think that is.
GitHub.io.
I believe that is exactly what we're looking at here. Yes, it's the same thing we're looking at.
Good.
Suites can be disabled with the X describe. That is the opposite of clarity, but okay, it exists. X describe. So you do an X, and that will skip it.
And there's an exit.
Interesting. So I guess, it's probably better than commenting it out. At least it makes it clear that it's there, but it wasn't run.
Right. It's okay. I'm going to withhold. I'm going to think about this before I jump.
Spies look pretty cool, by the way. I was looking at this.
Spies are basically, let's see what spies are. Spies are observers. Is that what they are?
Yeah. So it's something to say you can spy on a function or method, then come back later and say, did something call it? So maybe you have code and you don't know if anything's actually calling it. You can check later.
Now, I wonder if that would work with our crazy call stack.
That's the thing I was thinking too. I know that we finally have ECMAScript 5. I know that some things probably require ECMAScript 6 or one of the pending versions, which we don't have. So that might be an interesting exercise to determine which of these are compatible. I would guess most of them are.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see. Let's say that you've got a function in a script include that should ultimately be called like via a business rule. Could you assert? No. You could do it like you could maybe spy on it, then insert a record and verify that function was called or the business rule was called. Potentially.
I think the key is that somewhere along the way, you have to have a reference to the function that's actually getting called in order to spy on it. So I don't know. That's an interesting one.
Do you have say it's not by name, it's by reference?
Yeah. So when you define the spy, notice you've got before each. So foo equals set bar. So we're spying on foo on set bar. So we're basically
right. Yeah, we'll have to dig into this a little bit.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Because that could be really cool depending on.
Yeah, and so now we're getting down to the more esoteric. Where we're mocking, where you can delegate to other functions, throw error, stub. So again, the other mocking type mechanisms, which if as you were going along, at some point you're going to get to where you hit code that you don't want to call the real code, which either because it's too burdensome, or let's say it ultimately is going to call to an integration that won't exist in the testing environment, or somewhere in there you're going to get to something that you don't want to really call. And so this is kind of where you're beginning to get into that with these stubs and fakes and things like that. Okay. So good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff to be dug through on here. Again, we do not at this moment know exactly which of this whole set works in the ServiceNow testing environment. So that is a thing to be aware of. Go ahead and get rid of some of this guy right here. I never snoozed a push bullet, so luckily nothing crazy jumped up.
So now that we've run this, are there other examples on the server side of things that kind of come shipped out of the box, or they're just wondering if there's anything interesting we can glean about specifically how it's running in ServiceNow?
So let me show you what I did. Let's see. Do I remember?
I thought we had some out-of-the-box Jasmine tests that we could throw.
I think there are a few.
Oh, it's not the okay. What's the
What are you looking for?
test step? I'm looking to see what the class name of the test step is, so I can sys ATF step. Okay, sys ATF step. All right, so let's do sys. I want to look at the individual steps. Sys ATF step. So this is every test step defined on this system. And we only want the server-side code. I'm looking at the wrong thing. I want.
It's going to be that step config, I think. Yeah.
So you note that out of the box, there's not a huge number because 2 of those are mine. So there's 4. There's a successful, failing, server-side script, multi-batch test. And let's look at the I think the multi-batch test maybe was one of the ones that had more. No, that's one of the trivial ones. Picked wrong.
Looks like just an object definition.
Yeah. So this is one of those 2. And this is the one where I figured out, like looking at this is where I figured out, those are literal IDs. And that's how they're called, that's what they're calling to step.
Yep.
And you'll notice actually, so in this one, it's actually getting the username of somebody that was impersonated. So user.name is how they got that out of there.
Interesting.
But they're getting that from step 1.
Right.
That's
so
this ID of the step, not the person.
The sys ID of the test step.
Right. Okay.
Right. And this is the sys ID of that test step. And that's what gets, you notice that this one, it got dot value. And out of curiosity, so let's go to this guy.
So what's happening in that step 2? I'm curious.
So let's go to, this is the test that's happening there. So it did custom scripted test config. So this is even different from what we were talking about before. This is
it's doing a setup.
So it's using
assert that the name of the user.
Oh, sorry. So this is the code that thing is calling.
Oh, okay.
So this is one of those where we talked about how you could script. So this is the step. This is the step config. So this is like when you create a test step that's impersonate a user, right? It's one of these is built already for you. This is them creating one of those step configs themselves, and then adding it as a test step. So in this one, they're doing so this is kind of an arbitrary example code thing, right? Where it's just saying assert the name of the user starts with A. And you'll note actually, so this is actually the thing, we were talking before about the hard-coded descriptions when you add them. You'll notice that these step configs have a description generation script.
Got it. So this thing is running every time to generate
every time you create it. Yeah.
Got it.
And so this is the actual code of the test step. And so it's getting, an input variable. It's in their case, it's getting it. It's asserting here that it starts with, and then if it doesn't, it says failed and returns. So that's like code of so you could write your own step config and you could do something like this. So but the output Let's find where it's setting the output. So setting output message. This is what it's doing right here. User with sysid. That's the name.
Oh, and there's outputs.value as well. So it looks like
outputs.value. So that's so that's where it's setting, essentially that's what it's putting into that hash, and that's what it's being read later. So outputs.value is what it's returning. So you'll notice it's got inputs, outputs, and step result. So it's setting the result, which is like what the test runner sees. And the output is what it's making available to subsequent steps. So in fact, let's go and look at the step config for impersonate.
Oh yeah, that'd be pretty interesting.
And so what we should see is when we go down here, we should see outputs. Oh, do we not have?
No, we're just using
read only. Oh, look at that. Read only based on protection policy.
And oh yeah, notice too, it says the class type was Java. So this is not necessarily
not exposed to us. Okay.
Right.
Which is good. We don't want people writing other scripts that impersonate other people.
I wonder if it's that way for every other one of those. So let's see if we can do submit form. So I'm going to go back to mine. We're kind of going far afield, but actually this is if you guys are interested, I'm interested. Yeah, we're kind of exploring this. So if we look at the step config for submit a form,
that one
also read only. Oh, it's read only, but it's not
class type of script.
Yeah.
Read only, but we can see it. Okay, so what we want to look at is the step result. What I don't notice though is the output variable.
Is there a related list on this one similar to the last one? Because I know that
step result outputs. So interesting. You'll notice that in the one, it explicitly created output, but it looks like step result dot outputs is the same thing. Because
there's
our record ID. There's our table and record ID.
Yeah. That's how they got there.
So since we're in here, let us figure out what in the heck the sysid is that's being set on there.
Is that the only?
That looks like the only.
Oh wait, there we go.
No, there's some more down there. Is that the only two references to it?
The sysid of the form we were about to submit. That's got to be something else.
Yeah, I'm not seeing.
Interesting how you can reference test frame window though.
So I feel like this is my theory, is that the output, so it's getting written to a table, and the record of that output has to have a sysid, because every record in every table has a sysid. So that sysid is just the output. It would be like the sysid of a syslog message. At least that's what that is what I speculate.
All right. So the object lesson is when you are reading these outputs, do not get suckered into using sysid, because it's almost certainly not meaningful for anything that you're trying to do. If what you're trying to do is work, unless you're trying to do some real meta thing, if you're trying to work with the values that have existed through the chain of everything that you've done, then they're probably not going to, that's not going to be contained in that sysid. It'll be something weird and different. So getting all the way back to where we kind of started this.
No, it was good that we dug down into the step configs. I hadn't seen
that. I didn't know how any of that worked, honestly. So that's
it's cool, because now if you had no idea what it was, you could actually go and look at the step config and find out what's it writing to instead of
what that does is that gives us a mechanism, assuming that it's transparent enough that you can go see it. It might be completely opaque like the impersonate is, but assuming that that's available to you, you now have a way to these are not unknowable. So we figured out the one way by stringifying, we could see the keys, although we couldn't see the values from stringify. We could see the keys that were defined. That is one mechanism. I'll go ahead and change this while I'm in here because it's
bugging him.
It is bugging me, because if we run this again, we probably won't even run it now. But so that was one way. But we could go look at the code of the test step. And if we were coding our own test, let's say this properly, if we're coding our own step config and then instantiating that as a test step, we can put anything arbitrary that we want in step result dot outputs dot any value. At that point, it's like it's like a scratch pad, right? It's just a JSON object that we can fill with anything we want. And then at that point, it's callable. And I think probably that's also the definition of what would make a cannonball icon appear for subsequent ones.
That would make sense.
So that might be the thing we want to do. So we're kind of wrapping up at this point. That might be a thing to do next time we address this. We probably not going to do it next time. So maybe, at some point in a few weeks or more, we'll come back to this. When we do, that might be a thing worth doing, is kind of figuring out something we want to build our own step config for, and then do some of our own custom inputs and outputs and see what we can do. Because almost certainly, this is one of the things that we do know. I mean, we don't talk about roadmappy, forward-looking things. We do know that business units in the future are going to be building their own test steps. So you would have something like, so the way like all the all the step configs that exist now are very literal for the platform, right? Submit a form, get a value, et cetera, et cetera. They would be a higher value, like get a cart, assert a cart value,
right?
And so the team that develops service catalog would deliver those test steps to the larger platform. So it's going to be, we know that it's going to be organized that way, right? People that do the functionality will also deliver their own step configs to test that functionality.
That makes sense.
But this is a long journey, right? So in the interim, if you found yourself needing something like that doesn't exist, you would have to build it yourself. And so if that was the difference between getting some value out of this and not, you're going to have to kind of go the long way right now. As of February 2017, Istanbul, that's kind of what you have available if you need something outside of a delivered step config. Whew.
So one more thing to look at, Dave. So can
Sure.
you go back to that test step config for submit a form?
Sure.
Because there's one other thing, we found it in the code, but it looks like there is a related list for the outputs, and I'm suspecting that this is what's driving the cannonball, because it would be hard to infer from the code. But if you go down, see the related list at the bottom.
Output variables. Interesting.
Yep, and the output variables have those two things that we found in the code.
Oh, so it may not be purely from your script. It might almost be like a REST API where you've got to define this.
Oh, this is the thing you're talking about. Table and record ID.
Yep. So those are the two things.
There's the type.
So that's probably an even more, well, certainly a simpler way, so you don't have to dig through the code.
But now the question is, so when we create our own step config. Now the question is, and we'll have to figure out like our hypothesis and the kind of what order to do the stuff is, if we put it in the code and we don't have it here.
Mm-hmm.
My hypothesis would be you can use it programmatically, but you can't see it in the cannonball.
I would agree with that.
And then probably default to a string.
Yeah, I don't even know.
This seems to have a definition type.
But I think the definition type, I think all of this, my guess is going to be everything about this is the cannonball, not about filling the value. So I think the value is going to be whatever you put in, like when you do it up here.
Yep.
Whatever value you pass in,
you can still use it.
How the UI is going to treat it is probably based on this.
That would make sense.
I'm just guessing. I'll go with that.
I think it's a solid hypothesis.
Yeah, no. So the things that we do, we'll do it that way to.
We'll test it a few times, and then it'll be a theory.
Yep.
So that's what we can do. Is we can do a simple step config without doing any of this stuff, and see are we able to access that by a Jasmine test, and what do we see in the cannonball, and then we'll add this in and see what happens.
See if it adds it. Yep.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, gentlemen. Okay, so I apologize to everyone for the dumpster fire of the first 15 minutes. I have to figure out what's wrong with my system. Which is, I'll be honest and tell you that I'm extremely disappointed, because I was so very, very excited about the first simulcast to Live Coding TV, but such is life. Que sera, c'est la vie, c'est l'amour.
Welcome to my world.
Now the real question is, can we define test configs that we can expect the audio to be true and test our setup? Nah, it's a bad joke.
What?
I'm so tired I can't even figure that out.
I expect audio.
And by the way, it was such a mess trying to get this together. I never even got a beer. Do you guys have a beer? Tell me about your beers.
So I have the Ballast Point Commodore American Stout. It is still sealed.
I was at Ballast Point earlier this week, but I didn't have that one. No, I have nothing because I've been up since about 2 a.m. local time to travel across the country.
So independently, all three of us had 0 beers amongst us. I have
maybe that's what went wrong.
I have Speedway coffee and my leftover iced tea from Outer Limits lunch. Yeah. So I really truly want to get this on Live Coding TV, our live edu.tv by next week or next time, which I think will be next week. So I'm gonna figure out what's going wrong there. Yeah. So I am very bullish on that platform because you know, as much as I like YouTube, and the beauty of Restream is that we don't have to pick one. We can actually simulcast everything. And there can be others. Well, I have to be able to it's
a bandwidth thing.
No, I have to be able to RTMP to anything and have my audio go. That was the problem.
Okay.
So I think my Soundflower is corrupted. The fact that my Office tools died earlier today, and I had to FS check my disk to make them work again, it smells to me like it's my own system. That's it's like lupus of my computer. It's beginning to eat itself. It's attacking itself. All right, so we'll end it there. Thank you everybody for attending. And is there any lingering thing in the chat?
Not really.
No, doesn't look that way. Thanks again, John, for all the help with
Definitely.
links and things like that. Always appreciated.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Craig Stepp, and thank you everybody who showed up. And we will catch you again next time. Happy coding and have a great weekend.
Happy
Thanks,
Friday.
everybody.
Bye.
And this will be awkward because I don't have my normal setup where it's easy for me to stop that.